Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm going to be talking about episode 2 of Binbougami Ga. Now, since the last time I did a review of this show, I sat down and I've read pretty much all of the manga that has been translated into English. Fan translated, I should specify. However, I was poking around on the show's official Wikipedia page, and I discovered that it has already, with only 2 episodes out so far, been licensed by the good folks at Funimation. They even have an official Binbougami Ga website page on the official Funimation website. Funimation, in my book, are one of the best guys putting out anime these days. They have a lot of really talented voice actors, so I'm sure the English version of the show is going to be good. And yeah, this is a show that's really right up Funimation's alley, so I have a feeling that they're going to really do a very good job with that. So that's something to look forward to. But anyway, let's get into the actual episode itself. This episode, we're introduced to a new character, Bobby, who, I believe you me, I'm going to have plenty to say about Bobby a little later on. Now, the actual plot of this episode is really just sort of a very simple continuation of what we saw last episode with Momiji just still trying to suck out Ichiko's fortune. And here we just, as I said, we see the continuation of this, and the main thing here is that I think the conflict between these two is solidified. It is solidified that Momiji's not going away, she's not giving up, and that she's has no problem interfering in Ichiko's life directly in order to basically get a good crack at her. So, in a way, I guess you could maybe call this part 2 of the opening to Binbougami Ga. As I said, it does finish setting up the status quo for the series. And apart from that, though, there isn't really much going on here. But anyway, let's get right into things. Let's start talking about our characters here, and we might as well start, since I just mentioned her, with Momiji. Momiji, we finally do get to see that it is basically summed up as her motivation for why she is sticking with this, that she says to her boss is, "Even I have my pride." And honestly, I find this to be a somewhat shallow and slightly cliche motivation. But with someone as just flat out lazy and generally unmotivated as Momiji appears to be and is from the additional stuff that I've seen in the manga, this is probably about as reasonable an expectation of why she's going to stick with something like this and just not say screw it and toss the job to somebody else as we're ever as likely to get. And I do like that this episode does start giving us a little bit more insight into Momiji's personality, as we see she's apparently quite well versed in pop culture. Of course, we do see her actually reading manga the very first time we really get a look at her. In fact, she's actually reading the manga magazine that Binbougami Ga appears in Japan, although I'm sure a lot of you probably guessed that. So over the course of this series, we see her do riffs on a lot of other anime and manga shows. The ones I was able to pick out were Rosario Vampire, the original Mobile Suit Gundam from the 1970s. We also see, not directly from her, but during the course of that whole scene with the closet, we saw a reference to Doraemon, popular children's character. Some folks have called him the Mickey Mouse of Japan. I don't think that's a terribly accurate description. It's just he's a popular children's character in Japan, and well, Mickey Mouse is a popular children's character everywhere, including Japan. We also got to see, and it didn't actually come from Momiji, but we did get to see Ichiko, of all people, reciting Domon Kashu's line of, all my love, pain, and all my sorrow, blah, 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 from G Gundam, of all shows. Now, why in the world this show would want to make a reference to G Gundam is really beyond me. I'm sorry, but I thought that show pretty much sucked. But, taste is relative. So it does set up that that we are going to be seeing quite a bit of riffing on other anime and manga properties in the series. Now, this is something that does pop up some in the manga from what I've read, but I have a feeling that the anime may be going in a slightly heavier satire and or references to other anime shows than the manga originally was. I don't really have a problem with that. It's just a matter of, do they do it in a way that's funny, and how many of these jokes am I going to get? Because, as I said in my first episode review, I've been a little bit out of anime in more recent years. There just haven't been that many shows that have come down the line that have really caught my interests. And Binbougami Ga, being one of the more noticeable exceptions, is basically, as I said in the first episode, the reason why I've added this show to my list of reviews. But anyway, so we do see that Momiji is pop culture savvy. However, she is somewhat lacking in, well, let's say, people skills to some degree. I was amused very much, and this is indeed something from the manga, when she's introducing herself to the class. She immediately, after the basic introduction stuff, starts going on about what type of body types she likes and describing how heavy her period is. And well, naturally, this is extraordinary. Not really the sort of thing you should be sharing with people you've just met, especially if you're being introduced to a class as a new classmate. But I did find that to be a pretty funny scene, and I think it's a little telling in terms of Momiji character is that she doesn't have a problem saying just about anything. And honestly, for a character like Momiji, that's a real strength in my book. But let me see here. Yeah, one thing that I do have to I do have to comment is, in terms of Momiji, there was this one scene where she's on the phone talking to her boss about how I'm going to get Ichiko no matter what, and she says, and I didn't quite catch what she said in Japanese. It went by too fast, and I just didn't feel like going back and listening to it again. But it was actually translated as, "Do I get to do her?" And I'm sure that the screenshot of that is probably going to be making its way around the internet quite a bit lately, very soon, if it hasn't already. So I do hope that when they do officially translate that they do keep that line in there, just because of the very interesting double entente. And yeah, what can I say? I like the occasional double entente. So anyway, let me see here. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, okay, we'll talk about that. Oh, yeah. One thing that I did notice about Momiji is that when she shows up at the school, now you'll notice that she's wearing a uniform that's not in no way, shape, or form like Ichiko's. Well, first of all, she's wearing, because as you can see, it's a very long dress, she's wearing what is in Japan very obviously a winter uniform. And I guess, before I continue on, I guess I should let you folks know that I used to live in Japan. I moved there 2 different times. One time when I was in college to be an exchange student at a Japanese university for 8 months. And then a couple of months after I got out of college, I moved back again and had a job there for 2 years. So all in all, I lived in Japan for just a little under 3 years. So I consider myself reasonably well versed in the ins and outs of Japanese culture. So I'm going to be talking about what's going on with Japanese culture, as certain aspects of that relate to this episode, a little more in just a minute. But as I said, Momiji is very obviously wearing a winter uniform, and as we saw in the first episode, and made quite clear here, it's definitely not winter. So right there we're getting a very interesting indication that Momiji is meant to be somebody who kind of sticks out, doesn't really fit in, and is just a sort of a way of showing us and reminding us that she's not from the human world. Now, while she might be pop culture savvy, she's not quite mastered the art of being innocuous. And the fact that she almost killed somebody with a baseball makes that pretty clear. But anyway, I also, and again, this is my impression. I can't, point to a fact in a book or something like that. But I think that the uniform Momiji is wearing is actually not just a winter uniform, but a rather old-fashioned winter uniform. When I lived in Japan, and I did see, the teenagers wearing their winter uniform dresses, I really, really do not remember the skirts being that long. Now, naturally, the skirts on winter uniforms are going to be longer than the summer uniforms. But going down that far, that just strikes me as a sign that maybe Momiji is wearing a very retro-looking uniform. And retro-looking school uniforms are something that are going to pop up again with another character later on. But I'll talk some more about that when that happens. So anyway, let's talk about Ichiko here. Honestly, I don't really think there was a huge amount going on with Ichiko's character here. I do think that it is very telling about her that despite her whole personality essentially being a facade, just the way she interacts with other people, the fact that Ichiko really, really, really wants this charade to continue is obviously going to be a real driving force for her as the series goes on. She doesn't like the fact that Momiji is there, one, trying to take away her good fortune, and make that will cause the good things in her life to disappear. But she's come to that now that she doesn't have Sawano in her life anymore. This image that she's cultivated of herself, where she's this school idol, the person who gets to have the boys worship her and the girls hate her because she's so beautiful and talented. In a way, that's really all that Ichiko has left. As I said, the one person in her life that she really cared about, Sawano, has left her life, and for his own well-being, he has to stay away, and Ichiko knows this. So now it's understandable why she wouldn't want Momiji around, but I think that the way she reacts is really just a sign of her clinging to basically one of the few real constants that she has left. This image that she's cultivated for herself. And, well, obviously Momiji is not going to make keeping that masquerade going much easier. Oh yeah, one thing I did forget to mention and it just occurred to me that now about Momiji, is that when she introduces herself, she says her last name, and then the teacher says to her, "Are you sure that's how your name is pronounced?" And then she just goes, "Yeah, call me whatever," goes and sits down, and the teacher immediately calls her by a different surname, which incidentally is actually the surname that they do continue to use elsewhere through the rest of the series. Now, if you're not familiar with Japanese culture, let me shine a little bit of light on that. Now, as I'm sure you're all probably aware, Japanese folks write their names using characters. Most of you are probably familiar enough with Japanese culture, if you're an anime fan, to know that these are called kanji. Now, kanji are originally derived from the pictograms they use in China. And as somebody who studied Japanese, it was my second major in college. Okay, let me lay some facts out for you. Basically, there are 1,523 kanji that are used in Japanese. You only need to know about 1,000 of them in order to read a newspaper. And it is common all the way up into high school for kids to take kanji tests to see how many of them that they know. I mentioned that I had a job in Japan for 2 years. Well, my job was an assistant English teacher at a junior high school. And one time, one of the English teachers actually asked me, would you be willing to take one of the kanji tests that the students are taking? They would get a real big moral boost of seeing you do this. Now, I was a little reluctant to do this because even though it was it was my major in college, reading and writing were actually the stuff. Actually, I should say writing was always the part of Japanese that I struggled the most with, because one little tick on a character can change it into a completely different word. To give you an example, if you add one additional stroke to the character for plate, it turns into the character for blood. But anyway, ultimately I did agree to do the kanji test that was aimed at Japanese junior high school kids, and well, I'm sorry to say I didn't do very well on that. But on the other hand, the kids definitely did appreciate that. But anyway, the point I'm making here is that the characters that people use to write their names in Japanese can each be read between 1 and 6 different ways. So on all official Japanese forms, there is, of course, the place where you write the kanji, and then above it is a smaller little box where you use hiragana, the vastly more simple form of Japanese writing, to write out how that kanji is pronounced. Because, if you do happen to be Japanese and you do have, for whatever reason, a slightly unusual name, then yeah, things like what we see here can happen where people might make mistakes about what your name is. So yeah, sorry, I dropped something here. Let me get that. So anyway, there is that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Anyway, now that we've gotten that out of the way, I want to talk, before I move on to the character of Bobby, I want to talk a little bit more about Ichiko and Momiji. And I've been thinking about this a good bit lately, and been thinking about it while I was reading the manga, is that there's actually a lot of, as I said in the last review, Momiji and Ichiko are meant to, in many ways, be both parallels and opposites. And if you look at the way they are, in terms just visually, I really think that the creator of the series, whose name I've read but unfortunately escapes me at the moment, actually really did some hard work to visually show these differences. For example, Momiji has extremely long hair. I mean, it literally goes down to about her waist. Now, Ichiko has about shoulder-length hair. So again, we have opposites. We have long, we have short. Continuing along the long and short thing, Ichiko wears a very short skirt, while Momiji wears a very long dress. Okay, Momiji has sort of blonde hair, and while Ichiko has sort of silvery hair, silver and gold. And of course, we also have Momiji has yellow eyes, while Ichiko has blue eyes. Now, granted, the usual opposite of blue is considered to be red, and the usual opposite of yellow is considered to be green. However, you still do have two primary colors in contrast to each other. Another thing we have is that Ichiko is a very symmetrical character. Everything about the one side of her generally matches the other. Momiji is not a symmetrical character. You can see it's like she's got one hand is normal, the other one's in a bandage. If you pay careful attention, you'll notice that a lot of the time Momiji is only wearing one shoe. And when she's not wearing any shoes at all. Again, showing us another opposite, another contrast to Ichiko. Now let me see here. Actually, yeah, I think that about covers it. And now these, of course, may just purely be coincidences, like things like the hair color. I mean, I can't read the original creator's mind, but I'm just pointing out these things to you because they've occurred to me. Now, anyway, let's move on to the new character introduced in this episode, the character of Bobby. Now, as I said, I've read all the manga that I could find that's been released in English by the fans. This goes all the way up to chapter 23 so far that I've been able to find. And these first two episodes cover, not surprisingly enough, the first two chapters of the manga. Folks, I'm going to give you what you might consider a tiny little spoiler here, in that aside from being a perverted priest, there really is nothing else done with Bobby's character. He doesn't really grow, he doesn't really change, we don't really learn very much about him. He's just there to be this weird, perverted priest who also happens to be a black guy from, well, it's never explicitly stated, but in the Japanese media, unless they're poor folks from Africa, you can basically assume that any Japanese person, black person you see in the Japanese media, is from America. Now, there are, of course, the occasional exceptions to this, and I'm going to talk about one of those right now. And that is a fellow you see on Japanese TV who goes by the name of Bobby Ologun. Now, he is a black dude, but he's actually from Nigeria. And Bobby's shtick, and I'll throw up a link to his Wikipedia page so you can see that I am not BSing you about this, is that he goes on the seemingly endless array of Japanese variety shows, and his shtick is going on there and screwing up Japanese in a humorous way. A humorous way. And, just generally kind of making himself look like a big fool on Japanese TV for a living. Now look, I try not to begrudge anybody a living. Life's hard. But guys like Bobby, and there are more other folks out there like him, other foreigners in the Japanese entertainment industry, whose job it is basically to go on Japanese TV and basically conform to whatever stereotype Japanese people have of whatever they may be, may it be black guys or, American women, whatever. That's their thing. That's how they make their living, is going on TV and playing their stereotype to the hilt. Now, folks, again, as somebody who lived in Japan for about 3 years, I got to tell you, and this is just my personal opinion on the thing, I really, really do not like those folks. Now, there are other foreigners in Japan, and I've had these conversations with them about these people who just sort of laugh these guys off as harmless or who think they're funny. And you know what? Okay, those people are entitled to their opinions. Their opinion is worth exactly as much as mine is. That said, though, I think these folks really do generally do more harm than good. It is not exact Japan, and I hate to break it to all the anime fans out there, it's not the easiest place in the world to be a foreigner. Now, before you send me these hate mail about, oh, well, I went to Japan for 2 weeks and blah, 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 I had a great time. Well, I'm sorry, folks, that was a vacation. When you're actually living there, when it's day-to-day living, week after week, month after month, year by year, things work a little bit differently for you. The shine comes off and you start to see behind the curtain. You start to see the flaws. Now, and I'm not going to say that, Japan is a bad place to be for a foreigner. Again, it's like anywhere else. It's got its pros and its cons. There were days when I literally loved, I thought I was the luckiest guy in the world to be able to live in Japan. I was having a great time. There were other days when I was completely miserable and couldn't wait to get back on a plane to go home. But anyway, to bring it back to Bobby, while I was living there in Japan for those 2 years and working, my best friend was another American guy by the name of Javon. Now, Javon happened to be a black dude. And not to really get into a whole lot of very complicated social, racial, whatever things, I was always interested to see and hear his reactions to what it was like to not just be a foreigner, but to be a black foreigner in Japan. And man, oh man, guys, he has some stories that are vary between absolutely hilarious and, oh my God, I can't believe that actually happened to you. That's horrible. And Javon shared my opinion about these foreign folks who go on Japanese TV and act the stereotype. And he particularly hated Bobby. And the reason for this is, more than once, when he was just walking down the street, he actually would have random Japanese people start yelling, "Bobby, Bobby," at him, because they thought he was Bobby. Now, here's the thing about Bobby Olongu that I haven't mentioned. Bobby Alogu, or however you say his name, in addition to doing his stuff on television, is also a mixed martial arts guy. I mean, throw his name into image search. You'll see he's a pretty in shape guy. My friend Javon, well, he's about average height, and in about average shape. Apart from the fact that they are black, these two guys look nothing alike. And yet, because of this guy, he was still, having random people on the street, singling him out, yelling at him, mistaking him for this guy who basically plays the fool for a living. Now, look, I'm not trying to slam Japanese people for this. All right? I'm certainly not accusing Japanese people of being racist. Okay? And I'm not even accusing the creator of Binbougami Ga, of being a racist. In my book, if you accuse someone of being a racist, you are accusing them of having an extraordinarily damning character flaw and having hatred for their fellow human beings based on something as humongously inconsequential as the color of skin. Now, I am not accusing Japanese people, or again, the creator, of being racists. The problem is that in Japan, there are approximately about 1.5 million foreigners, or just slightly over 1% of the Japanese population. And the majority of those folks are actually Chinese. So if you actually sit down and do the math, the number of actual black people in Japan is absolutely tiny. So for the vast majority of Japanese people, black people have never seen a black person in the flesh. If they have, it's probably just somebody who's walking down the street somewhere in a major city. And then if you take the number of Japanese people who have actually seen a black person and go to the number of Japanese people who have ever actually spoken to a black person, the number falls dramatically. So the whole thing I'm trying to say here is that basically for your average Japanese person, black people are just something they have only ever seen on television. And because of that, black people just don't quite register to Japanese people the same way they would to us folks from more diverse countries. And again, I'm not saying that as an attack on Japanese folks. I'm just saying that honestly as a statement of fact. That's just how it is. And that's why the character of Bobby, notice the name, bothers me so much. And he even says, when we first see him, he's speaking, and if you don't speak Japanese, you won't notice this, but he is speaking in an unusual way. And then later on, he switches to speaking standard Japanese. And Ichiko even comments on this and basically says, like, hey, wait a minute, what's wrong? Hey, wait a second, you can speak properly now. And Bobby even tells us that, oh yeah, well, my mother told me that if you're in Japan and you need help, just sort of play up the whole foreigner thing and Japanese people will help you. I mean, literally, that's what he says in the episode. And we just see, this is really hard for me to put into words because, again, I don't want to seem like I'm trying to attack someone or that I'm accusing someone of racism. But in Bobby, we just see something that to me just screams like negative foreigner stereotype. Bobby is there to just basically be a big pervert, to be useless, and because he's foreign, because he's black, this is all somehow meant to be even funnier. And I'm sorry, that just bothers me. You know what? I'm just going to leave it at that. That it bothers me. And I'm going to leave it at that. So anyway, let's talk about some of the less controversial aspects of the character Bobby. Now, if you do see when he introduces himself, he actually introduces himself, and we see his name written in kanji. Well, I had to do some. Now, as I said, my reading and writing in Japanese are a little bit on. Were always something that I still had to work with, even though I had it was my major in college, and I was able to get the characters for his name off the Wikipedia website, and from what I can tell, these are actually extremely. 2 out of 3 of them are apparently extremely uncommon characters. They translate, if I remember correctly, as stuff along the lines of mind expanding, loot, and authority. Now, in all likelihood, this is, of course, when Bobby did become a Buddhist priest, and as I understand, this is not unusual for Buddhist priests, is to take a Buddhist name. And often in these situations in Japan, they will go for the more flowery, complicated kanji because, well, for a lot of reasons. One, obviously the visual appeal. There's a whole numerology thing involving the strokes of kanji for creating, good fortune and prosperity. But anyways, he does, of course, he does do that, but he picks characters in a way that allow him to write out his name as Bobby in Japanese using kanji. But again, if you pay attention, there are some to those kanji. There are some over them is some writing. Now, because Bobby is a foreign person and has a foreign name, those are written in katakana, the characters used for non-Japanese words, rather than hiragana, the words that are used for Japanese words. In fact, that writing above kanji has a name all of its own. It's called furigana. But anyway. Wow, I went and lost my train of thought there. Anyway, I do like that they did let Bobby write his name out in kanji. I thought that was very in keeping with his nature as a Buddhist priest, and it did help me take him a little bit more seriously as a character, but not much. But anyway, let me see. Is there anything else here? Just looking at my notes. No, I think that's about all that I had to say. Anyway, let me wrap things up here. From having watched these 2 episodes of the anime and having from read the manga, I've come to really like Binbougami Ga. But that said, from all I've read and from all I've seen, I'm still really bothered by the character of Bobby. I think, and again, as I've said, I don't really lay any blame, or I'm not accusing the creator of anything malicious or anything bad. I'm certainly not accusing them of racism. I just feel like Bobby is a continuation of a trend that just plain makes foreigners look bad. And honestly, I feel bad for the fellow foreigners back in Japan because the folks there are, again, just like everybody else. They're just trying to get through their lives day by day, and these really embarrassing stereotypes of foreigners, they don't make life any easier. Now, certainly Japan is not unique in having these ridiculous and embarrassing stereotypes about foreigners, but the thing is, though, since foreigners are so uncommon in Japan, there's really not anybody who's in a position to protest. And even if they do protest, the number of people who would do so are so small that they'd almost certainly be ignored. So it's really so it's not like it is in more diverse countries where if you put a horrible stereotype of a foreigner on TV, well, you're going to get an earful from it. And honestly, I think that, more than anything, that knowing that anybody who is upset by this really can't do much of anything about it, that's what bothers me about Bobby more than anything else. Okay, folks, now I'm sorry that for being so negative and so heavy this review. I'm going to try and focus more on the funny from now on. But this thing with Bobby, it's not going to go away for me in regards to this show. But I did want to get that out there, explain my position, and clarify once again that I'm not accusing anybody of racism. I just find that the character to be bothersome. And with that said, I'm going to end this. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. And until next time, take care and have a good one.